This is the number nobody in Washington wants to say out loud: $15 billion. At exactly 9:12 a.m. on September 30th, 2025, a single classified directive from the Trump administration brought America's largest infrastructure project to a grinding halt. The Gateway Hudson Tunnel Project, a vital rail link carrying 200,000 commuters daily between New York and New Jersey, became the latest casualty in Trump's unprecedented use of federal spending as a political weapon. But this wasn't about fiscal responsibility or government waste. This was about raw partisan revenge, and Trump admitted it publicly. "We're only cutting Democrat programs," he declared during an October cabinet meeting, his words captured on live television. "What we're doing is we're cutting Democrat programs that we didn't want." The Gateway Project, 20 years in the making and backed by $15 billion in congressional appropriations, had just become collateral damage in Trump's war against blue state America. The scale of what Trump destroyed with a single order is staggering. The Gateway Development Commission, overseeing construction of new rail tunnels beneath the Hudson River, received notice from the Department of Transportation that all federal reimbursements were immediately suspended pending what officials called a compliance review. There was no warning, no explanation, and no clear justification for why congressionally approved funding that had been flowing for years suddenly needed to be frozen. Within hours, contractors working at multiple construction sites across New York and New Jersey learned that the $2 billion already invested in the project was now at risk. The massive tunnel boring machines, each as long as a football field and weighing nearly 1,700 tons, sat idle as work crews awaited word on whether their paychecks would continue. The human cost became apparent immediately. New Jersey Governor Mickey Sherrill warned that 1,000 union workers would lose their jobs if construction stopped, while hundreds of thousands of commuters faced the prospect of losing reliable train service that would make their lives easier. These weren't abstract numbers on a government spreadsheet. These were skilled tradesmen, engineers, and construction workers who had been building America's infrastructure, suddenly finding their livelihoods hanging in the balance because of a presidential temper tantrum. That's what the president doesn't seem to get, that there are working men and women feeding their families on this job. And every day that goes by that he doesn't release the funds is a day that our families are in trouble, Governor Sherrill explained, her frustration evident as the funding freeze stretched into its fourth month. Trump's public statements about the Gateway Project revealed the true motivation behind the funding freeze. This wasn't about protecting taxpayer dollars or ensuring project efficiency. This was about punishing Democrats for opposing his political agenda. This is not only jobs. I mean the project in Manhattan, the project in New York. It's billions and billions of dollars that Chuck Schumer has worked 20 years to get. It's terminated, Trump announced, explicitly targeting Senate Minority Leader Schumer's longtime advocacy for the tunnel project. He doubled down during multiple public appearances, declaring the project is going to be dead. It is pretty much dead right now, and the Gateway Project is terminated because the Democrats are so foolish. The President of the United States was openly bragging about destroying a critical infrastructure project to spite his political opponents. The legal implications of Trump's actions became clear when New York Attorney General Letitia James and New Jersey Acting Attorney General Jennifer Davenport filed a federal lawsuit against the administration. Their complaint didn't mince words, alleging that Trump is engaged in political retribution that violated federal contracting law and constitutional principles. The states argued that the Department of Transportation's sudden funding freeze was arbitrary and capricious, lacking the reasoned explanation required by the Administrative Procedures Act. More damning still, the lawsuit revealed that Trump had offered to release the frozen funds in exchange for naming rights, proposing a deal that would put his name on Penn Station in New York and Washington Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia. The president was literally holding infrastructure hostage for personal branding opportunities. The administration's shifting explanations for the funding freeze exposed the political nature of the decision. Initially, White House Budget Director Russell Vought claimed the project violated unconstitutional DEI principles, suggesting that diversity requirements somehow made the tunnel construction illegal. When that explanation fell apart under scrutiny, the Department of Transportation switched to claiming concerns about compliance with disadvantaged business enterprise programs. Then officials said they were checking compliance with old rules, then new rules. By January, the White House had pivoted again, claiming the freeze was related to an impasse over Department of Homeland Security funding, an issue that had emerged months after the original suspension. The constantly changing justifications made clear that the administration was searching for legal cover for what everyone knew was a partisan attack. The economic consequences of Trump's decision cascaded beyond the immediate construction sites. The Gateway project supports 95,000 full-time jobs and generates more than $19 billion in economic activity across the Northeast corridor. Every day of construction delays wastes millions in taxpayer dollars while adding between $15 and $20 million in monthly costs due to project suspension. The states, which are responsible for cost overruns, faced mounting interest charges on credit lines they were forced to use to keep minimal operations running while federal payments remained frozen. Trump's actions weren't saving money. They were actively wasting it while punishing the workers and commuters who rely on functional infrastructure. The timing of the funding freeze was particularly cruel. Construction had been proceeding on schedule and under budget until Trump's intervention. Governor Sherrill emphasized this point repeatedly, noting that until Trump's illegal actions forced the project to shut down the 1,000 hardworking men and women off the job and threatened the commutes of 200,000 people a day, Gateway was on time and under budget. The project had been moving forward smoothly for years, with federal agencies having obligated roughly $15 billion in funding under federal laws designed to ensure the safety, reliability, and resiliency of core infrastructure. New York and New Jersey had invested more than $500 million of their own money, and New Jersey had acquired over 100 parcels of land needed for construction. All of this progress was jeopardized by a presidential decision based purely on partisan spite. Federal Judge Jeanette Vargas saw through the administration's excuses when the case reached her courtroom. She ruled that New York and New Jersey had demonstrated that the construction shutdown would have an immediate and severe impact on the region's economic interests. The states had shown that allowing the project to stop would put one of the country's most heavily used transit corridors at risk, exactly as Attorney General James had argued when filing the lawsuit. Vargas ordered the federal government to restart payments, but even then the administration continued fighting, asking a federal appeals court to overturn her decision while slowly releasing only partial funding. The broader implications of Trump's Gateway assault extend far beyond a single infrastructure project. This represents the weaponization of federal spending power against states that refuse to bend to presidential demands. As one analysis noted, Republican and Democratic state leaders building major projects with federal dollars now have to assume they could end up in the same position as New York and New Jersey, their congressionally approved funding held hostage to presidential whims. The precedent is terrifying. Any president could now freeze appropriated funds to punish political opponents, turning the federal budget into a tool of partisan warfare. The Gateway project's vulnerability stems from its critical importance to the Northeast economy. The existing rail tunnels, damaged by Superstorm Sandy and now 116 years old, are so deteriorated that Amtrak engineers regularly venture deep underground to assess whether the structure remains safe for train operations. Should the old tunnels be forced to close before their replacements are completed, 200,000 daily commuters would have no way to travel between New York and New Jersey by rail. The economic catastrophe would ripple through the entire region, affecting millions of workers and businesses that depend on reliable transportation. Trump's willingness to gamble with this critical infrastructure for political gain demonstrates a reckless disregard for American economic security. The international implications are equally concerning. The Gateway project represents the kind of major infrastructure investment that America needs to remain competitive with countries like China, which are rapidly modernizing their transportation networks. By freezing funding for political reasons, Trump sent a signal to allies and competitors alike that American infrastructure development is subject to the whims of partisan politics rather than national economic needs. The project's delays and uncertainty undermine confidence in America's ability to complete long-term strategic investments, potentially discouraging international partners from collaborating on future infrastructure initiatives. Trump's description of Gateway as a boondoggle and disaster contradicted the assessment of transportation experts and federal agencies that had spent years evaluating the project. The tunnels are essential infrastructure, not optional extras. The existing Hudson River crossings are operating beyond capacity and showing their age after more than a century of service. Without Gateway, the Northeast Corridor faces the prospect of transportation gridlock that would affect not just daily commuters, but freight movement and intercity passenger rail service along the entire eastern seaboard. Trump's characterization of this critical project as wasteful spending revealed either a fundamental misunderstanding of American infrastructure needs or a willingness to lie about them for political advantage. The legal battle over gateway funding exposed the limits of presidential power over congressionally appropriated funds. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse, and lawmakers had specifically allocated billions of dollars for the tunnel project through multiple budget cycles. Trump's attempt to unilaterally freeze these appropriations represented an assault on congressional authority that ultimately failed when federal courts intervened. Judge Vargas's ruling reaffirmed that presidents cannot simply ignore congressional spending decisions they disagree with, even when those decisions benefit states controlled by the opposing party. The successful legal challenge to Trump's funding freeze established important precedent protecting congressional appropriations from presidential interference. The human stories behind the gateway crisis illustrate the real-world impact of using infrastructure as a political weapon. Construction workers who had been steadily employed on the project suddenly faced unemployment through no fault of their own. Commuters who relied on plans for improved rail service saw their hopes dashed by partisan politics. Small businesses that had invested in areas around planned gateway stations faced uncertainty about future development. These weren't political operatives or partisan activists. They were ordinary Americans whose lives were disrupted because their governor belonged to the wrong political party. The resolution of the gateway funding crisis, while temporarily successful, highlighted the fragility of American infrastructure development in an era of extreme polarization. Even after courts ordered the restoration of federal payments, the Trump administration continued fighting the decision through appeals while releasing funds slowly and grudgingly. The final release of $127 million in overdue payments came only after intense legal pressure and public criticism, with officials requiring multiple court orders to comply with their obligations. This pattern of resistance suggests that future infrastructure projects involving federal funding will face similar risks whenever partisan control of government changes. Trump's gateway gambit ultimately failed, but the damage it caused will persist long after the current crisis is resolved. Construction delays have added millions in unnecessary costs that taxpayers will ultimately bear. Worker layoffs disrupted skilled teams that took years to assemble and train for specialized tunnel construction. Most importantly, the precedent of using infrastructure funding as a political weapon has been established, creating uncertainty for every major project that depends on federal support. Future presidents now know they can freeze congressionally appropriated funds with impunity, at least temporarily, by manufacturing bogus compliance concerns or other bureaucratic obstacles. The Gateway Tunnel project will eventually be completed despite Trump's interference, but at a higher cost and after unnecessary delays that harmed workers, commuters, and the broader economy. The real victory for Trump wasn't stopping the tunnels, which proved impossible given their critical importance and strong legal protections. The real victory was demonstrating presidential power to inflict pain on political opponents, even when that power is ultimately limited by courts and Constitution. Every day of frozen funding, every displaced worker, every delayed commute represented a small triumph in Trump's campaign to punish blue state America for refusing to submit to his agenda. The Gateway crisis revealed the true cost of turning infrastructure into a partisan battleground. Not just wasted money and delayed projects, but the erosion of trust in American institutions and the abandonment of shared national purpose in favor of political revenge.